right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Neptune Sunday. It's your boy V Moss. Guest today is a journalist, author who has been featured in Time, Rolling Stone, Double XL, Complex, and more. In 2023, she released her book Fashion Killa: How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion, which is the first of its kind anthology of hip hop, fat and fashion. Welcome to the show, Sowmya Krishnamurthy. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Of
We're going to get
course.
into the book. I love the book. I was telling you before we started recording that I gave the book to my niece for Christmas and she loved it. So we're going to get to that in a second. But let's just start off with letting people get to know you. Just talk about growing up in Michigan, as an Indian American kid in the Midwest. Like, how did you get to fall in love with hip hop?
Yeah, I think when you probably look at me and see the byline, it doesn't scream hip hop to you. I know, shocking. So, I mean, my backstory actually was I was born in India. So I'm not from America. So please forgive me if my English isn't that great. It's always a great excuse. Like, what do you mean? I don't speak English. I actually speak very good English. So I initially moved to California and I lived there for about 7 years of my life. And then we moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan. And if anybody knows Kalamazoo, first of all, hats off to you. Really outside of like the Derek Jeter fans, because he's also from Kalamazoo, very few people know about it. But it's kind of right between Detroit and Chicago. And it's like a small Midwestern town. Now it has gotten bigger. It has, multiple universities and it is becoming a sizable community. But, it was a very interesting experience. I mean, I think even growing up, I always did sort of feel like different and kind of as the other. I mean, how could I not? So for me, hip hop, when I was a teenager, probably about like 12, 13, I really just gravitated towards it. I think in the same way around that time, you're just figuring out what you like listening to, what aesthetically is drawing you. I remember so distinctly in sixth grade, we ended up moving to a house, like from an apartment to a house, and my parents got a second TV in their room. And finally, I was able to watch like MTV because as a kid, you always have your parents over your shoulder. I watched so much MTV and BET that year. I know, shocking as someone who was the former valedictorian, that was like the one year my grades went from like A's to B's because I was just consuming videos like 24/7. The internet was just sort of starting. So there would be like, the OK Player message board and Yahoo chat room. So music just started really taking over my life. So it was like the magazines we were reading. I think I was the only person in Kalamazoo who ever bought Blaze magazine. Like for some reason, Myers grocery store on West Main carried Blaze magazine. I think they sold one copy and it was probably to me, but I was just fully immersed. And, what was crazy was it wasn't just I loved the music. I knew I was going to work in the industry. Like at a very young age, I knew I'm going to work in hip hop. And, now with the internet and social media, we're all so connected, which you got to think back then, I knew no one in the industry. Clearly, I don't look exactly like someone who 90s hip hop would hire me or 2024 hip hop. That's neither here nor there. But I just knew, like, from jump, I'm going to work in the music business. I thought I was going to work at a label. Like, that was the dream. But that was just something I always carried with me. I didn't tell anyone. And then, later as I traversed, I went to University of Michigan. I went to the business school there. But I was writing for our school newspaper and I had my own column, my own byline. And what ended up happening, kind of a funny story, I wrote about Vote or Die, which was Sean Puffy Combs' voter initiative at the time. It was kind of critical. Like if you follow me on social media, you know now that those hot takes, I think they started at a very young age. I was always very opinionated. And somebody from Bad Boy read that article and called me. I think they wanted to yell at me because it was more so them trying to explain, why they were right, I was wrong. But I flipped that into an internship. And that was something that really got my foot in the door in this industry. And I've had a very kind of unique trajectory. When I first graduated, I was pushing a mail cart at William Morris, which is a big Hollywood talent agency, in their very like esteemed training program. I worked at a digital startup called Ice Media, where we did a lot of digital campaigns for people like Cash Money and Sony and Def Jam and all these things. And the journalism thing I kind of just fell into. Like my day job just really wasn't fulfilling me on the music front. So I would be the person on my lunch break. I would be interviewing people like J. Cole or, Kendrick or Drake. Like these are just things that we were doing during that blog era. And around 2012, it turned into a full time situation. I've been freelance like my whole career. So I've worked with a lot of different publications, but I like it because it's kind of like enabled me to see the industry from a variety of perspectives. And I think when you are freelance, you eat what you kill, and your mentality and the way you approach this game is more aligned to like the guys in the 90s that I looked up to, where they weren't waiting for opportunities, they were creating their own.
Got you. So you're our second guest from South Asian heritage. So shout out to Show
Who,
Me.
who else did you okay, I was going to say, who else did you have? And of
Yeah,
course, you
Show Me.
said the one other name. So, hi, Show Me.
Show Me's from Virginia too. So like that was a big deal for us. And then I have a friend who I'm close with that I grew up with in Richmond, who I like got connected with on the hip hop scene. So like, are there things specifically about the aspects of hip hop culture that you feel like resonate with people from the South Asian communities?
I mean, it's interesting. Growing up, I didn't grow up with like a big Indian community.
Mhm.
In my high school, it was like me, my brother, and like 1.5 other people. One person was half, so I'm giving them the 0.5. And you got to remember, like, as a kid in the 90s, we just didn't have that representation. Now you turn on the TV and, there's Mindy Kaling or Hassan Minaj, or, every show has like the Indian friend. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like every ensemble, they're not the main yet. We're not there, but you get to be like the friend. And hopefully you get like one or two lines. So for us, it really was kind of like Apu. And I'm a huge Simpsons head. So that's, another conversation. But I didn't really see Indians or South Asians gravitating towards hip hop. And I'm going to be honest with you, even now, I would say hip hop is incredibly homogenous, like on the industry side. You're starting to see people, but oftentimes, even myself, I'll meet other South Asians in the entertainment business. And to them, they're like, well, we only know people who cover South Asian music. So if you cover South Asian hip hop, and obviously there's big scenes going on overseas, there's Punjabi rap and Tamil rap and Malayalam, or there's every single place in South Asia based upon country, based upon language, has their own scene. But I think within the American industry, it's still really quiet. Like I could stand on and say that with Fashion Killa, this is the first book by an Indian American hip hop author because there's nobody else, And I think slowly we're probably going to see inroads, but hip hop is still really homogenous. And I tweeted not too long ago, growing up, I saw more women in this game that I'm seeing now, which like boggles my mind that we've almost kind of reverted to it being very much like a dude fest. And there's a lot of guys who are very, I guess you could say, like similar in where they're from or their perspective or their age. And, to me, I'm just somebody who I really think that different perspectives are so important, not just like for artists, but even how you contextualize music and culture and things like that. So, I don't really see a lot of like South Asians gravitating to hip hop or even just the music business. So you have to remember, at least in this country, most people are immigrants, and your average immigrant parent, wherever you're from, they want you to get a real job, like a job that pays health insurance and a job where you get paid every 2 weeks. And in this game, at the highest of the highs, it's incredible, but like 99% of people, it's a struggle, and you might for decades be grinding and grinding and grinding. Maybe you'll go somewhere, maybe you'll go nowhere. So I think for me, just my presence in this industry, a big part of it is representation, not just for women or South Asians, but for anyone who just may not feel like they've been represented in hip hop. Like, no, there is a place for you. You may have to carve your own place, but know that it's possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's get into the book. I really enjoyed the book. And so I got my copy right here with my sticky note and my notes in it.
Nice.
It was really dope for me to read and hear some more, get some more insight on some really important moments in this space that I actually lived through. Like the Tommy Hilfiger thing was crazy. Like I don't think I realized until a few years ago that like he didn't actually say it. Like I grew up and lived that where my mom was telling me we're not buying that. Like that whole situation was crazy. I do very vividly remember seeing the LL Gap FUBU commercial on TV like in real time and having no idea like how and just appreciating from because I'm in marketing, so just appreciating like how much of a big guerrilla marketing statement that was and like how strategic that was, and to get away with it is just absolutely crazy. So overall, like I said, I loved it. I really appreciate how it's not just a history lesson of hip hop and fashion, but it's really like got some really important world history parts of it that are intertwined into like who we are as a culture here in America, but also like how different things across the world have affected hip hop, but also just fashion and the culture in our country as well. So talk a little bit about where the idea of the book came from and how it came to life.
Sure. So the origin was a article I'd done in Double XL as a freelancer in about 2018. It was assigned to me. Shout outs to my editor at the time, John Kennedy. I went back to that email and he said it's going to be like 1,300 words, get a few interviews and won't be that big of a deal. Fast forward 80,000 words later, I'm pretty sure he lost that bet. But, as I was doing the research for that, I realized that there just wasn't any book on this subject. There were a few biographies, few autobiographies, coffee table books, but there really wasn't anything that looked at the subject matter with, I guess, the expansive lens that I think it deserved. Now, I'm going to be honest, as writers, we constantly have like a notebook of book ideas, documentary ideas, just ideas. Like that's just what we do all day. And I didn't think too much of it until maybe a few years later. It was the start of the pandemic, and my lit agent at the time was really serious about me putting together a proposal. And my first stab at a proposal was like a disaster. So shout outs to him for even reading that. But once we put together the proposal, the process was pretty quick. Fun fact though, and I've said this in other interviews, most people passed on this book.
Hmm.
So it's funny that so many people love it. And it's great to hear your feedback or your niece's feedback. It's gotten amazing just press coverage, critical acclaim. Most editors were like, I just don't get it. Like in the world of the literary space, hip hop is still considered very niche, which is crazy to us, right? Like it's already been the biggest genre insofar as like streams and consumption and sales. It's global. It affects everything from music to fashion to how people talk. I mean, you listen to like slang that rappers use, and now that's being disseminated to all aspects of the globe. But the powers that be really felt like, well, hip hop is niche, fashion is niche. You put them together, this should be a magazine article. It shouldn't be a book. And how are you going to make 80,000 words out of this? How are you going to crank out 15, 16, 17 chapters out of this? And that was the challenge. And as I was putting it together, it was really important. Of course, this is a hip hop story. I want somebody who's a fan, regardless of when they came into the industry as a fan, to go to their favorite moments. There is, Lil Kim at the VMAs. It's, Snoop wearing the Tommy Hilfiger rugby on Saturday Night Live. It's ASAP Rocky and what he did bringing Harlem to Soho, like all of these moments. Pharrell's like famous Vivian Westwood hat, Nego, BBC, BAPE, all of those moments. But what does that mean within sort of like not just larger hip hop culture, but American pop culture and also just American history? Like this really is its history, it's politics, it's psychology. Like we don't think about that when we're putting on clothes, but it's really this holistic decision making process that we make, as well as decisions that are made for us based upon things that have gone on history in this country or abroad. So it was really important with this book to give hip hop the respect that I think it deserves. And that's something for me as an author, even with my next book. Like it's really about finding important stories, documenting them, but doing it in a way that's smart and analytical and interesting, but also through the lens of prestige. Because I really think hip hop just doesn't get the respect it always deserves.
Yeah, I definitely like like the concept, and we're going to get into my niece in a second, how she can be reminded or learn some things or be talking about some things that she might be learning in history class that come up in this book because they're relevant. Like the whole concept of Julius Caesar wearing purple and purple label, like that's like stuff like that is important to be able to show that that's something that people view and hold in a high regard. And like we're showing, you do a great job of showing how it's connected to hip hop in a way that is like really authentic and makes sense for, how important it is to the culture.
Absolutely. And I think even now, oftentimes when you see like a young artist, spending a good chunk of their advance on like clothing or jewelry, it's so easy to write it off as just materialism or just sort of like this ostentatiousness. And a part of that is there, but you have to also look at the historical context. When we are talking about things like sumptuary laws or dress codes that specifically enslaved people in this country were held to, there's a long history of being able to wear certain things, having no agency over your body. So, yeah, when we fast forward to 2024, you get that big check, you're going to Gucci, you're going to Louis Vuitton, and just showing it's almost like a middle finger to these big European heritage brands that I can do this. And now I have a place within this society. And I think in America specifically, you can't show people your retirement account. You don't walk around showing people your mortgage, but your chain says a lot before you walk into the room, or having head to toe labels. It's funny in sort of like kind of like mainstream, so-called mainstream fashion, it's about like quiet luxury, don't show labels. And that is a certain psychology that tends to be people who either grew up with money, have generational wealth. But if you're nouveau riche, and most of us, if we do become rich, we are nouveau riche, we're going to go crazy because it's not about being quiet. It's about showing everyone as well as yourself that I made it.
Right. So we talked about my niece Natalie. I gave the book to her for Christmas. She's getting into her teenage years and starting to become a fan of hip hop and fashion. She's a big Tyler the Creator fan. So the next couple questions are from her. The
Love
first
it. Let's go.
is Our first question is, what other genre of music do you feel had an impact on fashion?
Whew, that's a good question. I think sort of the interesting genres come from a place of disruption. They come from a place, oftentimes like youthful angst. So I would say the punk scene for sure. And for me, growing up in the 90s, I mean, I'm going to say grunge. I know a lot of the fashion people hated it. They thought it was the opposite of fashion, but I look really good in flannel. So definitely grunge. But if we pull back, I mean, rock and roll, of course, over time had such a huge impact, whether it was, you know, this idea of working with like gender and remember, like the glam rock of like the 80s. You see like, the princes of the world and, Van Halen and all of that, Bon Jovi. Yeah, so I think, a lot of different genres have had an impact, but to me, the most interesting is when it comes from a place that's much more underground, where people have to sort of like DIY it, like figure it out, stitch it together, no pun intended, versus just like immediately going and getting like the biggest brand names or the luxury designers. So I would say punk for sure, grunge for sure, and I got to give like a hat tip, of course, to rock.
Got you. Next question from Natalie. Do you think that the clothing the celebrities wore brought more attention to them, maybe more than the music in some cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Natalie definitely has her finger on the pulse of what's going on now. And it's interesting because so much of this book, it is a 50-year retrospective starting from 1973 going through 2023. Funny enough, like the bookend is when Pharrell got his job at Louis Vuitton. And when that happened, I was so happy because then I knew how I could end my book because I wasn't really sure. So shout outs to Pharrell on that. You know, so much of it before was you became an artist first, that garnered you fame and credibility, and then fashion came calling. I believe there has been a bit of a paradigm shift where we're in an era now of the influencer, where I'm not sure if you make music, but I know who you are. I know what you look like. You have a lot of followers. I cannot name 5 songs that you've done. And I think it becomes really tricky because, on one hand, I look at some of these younger artists, Gen Z artists, and I can't be mad if you're securing the bag. And let's be honest, a check from a fashion line, a check to sit front row at Fashion Week, probably, it's less work and getting more ROI than going into the studio and putting out music, right? That said, I think it's a very slippery slope when we have a generation of artists who are so interested in securing the bag. That becomes more important than actually being an artist first, being a producer first. Like, I think a lot of artists now, it's like, so why did you get into this game? Because I want to make money. Well, that's great, but like, do you want to be the best artist or producer? I don't care. Oh, okay. And that mentality, I think, has somewhat denigrated the music.
Yeah. So, who was your favorite interview for the book through this whole process?
That's a great question. So for me growing up, like I was a huge Dipset head. So I got to interview Cam about his famous like pink fur moment. And funny enough, I interviewed him at a jewelry store here in New York right before he was going on stage for the verses against the Locks. So that was a very interesting, the timing was very interesting. And I thought Dipset was going to just sweep. So I was wrong. Jada and the Locks really came in. It's all about the sequencing of the songs, but that was a great opportunity. And just to be able to talk to people like Dapper Dan, Tommy Hilfiger, his brother Andy Hilfiger, like these historic figures, Carl Kanai, April Walker, that was amazing as well. And one thing I really wanted to make sure with the interviews that it wasn't just focused on the big names because you're going to get your Pharrell quote, you're getting your ASAP quote. Because I've interviewed all these artists over the course of my career, but I also wanted people behind the scenes that you may have never heard of, but that were so instrumental. So, in these interviews, I got to interview some of the lowlifes who were known in New York for sort of boosting polo. I was able to interview people at the Source magazine who were part of discovering Tyson Beckford. Like Tyson Beckford is the face of polo, but he was discovered in the Source. A lot of people don't know that. So those kind of moments were really joyful and very also just informative for me. It's funny, you approach a book like this thinking, oh, yeah, I know everything, or I know probably 80%. I knew nothing. And so much of it was me learning or me maybe knowing the headline, but going deep into it, like the Tommy Hilfiger rumor. By the way, I feel Tommy needs to send me like free clothes or something because I've been doing so many interviews time after time. Like radio hosts, podcasters, journalists are like, I didn't know that rumor never happened. For those who don't remember, back in the late 90s, this rumor circulated that said Tommy Hilfiger had gone on Oprah and said some really problematic, racist things, how he didn't want black and brown people wearing his clothing. I remember so distinctly hearing about it in middle school. No one knew where it came from because, again, we didn't watch Oprah. We were kids, but it's this rumor that just circulated. And in many ways, I would say it canceled him, but it kind of took him out of the good graces for a very long time. But as I interviewed him and his brother, they said that this was a rumor that never happened because Tommy's like, I never even went on Oprah at the time. It started, they traced it, they did like private investigation. They traced it to a college campus. They don't know who it was. My gut, it was some like bored college kid, like just on their computer. And they just created what was like kind of like fake news of that time. And it had a very detrimental effect. Of course, it didn't cancel Tommy. People still wear it. But in many circles to this day, people are like, I only realized that it didn't happen after reading your book. So I think you're going to get a lot of those moments as well. One thing I have to shout out because, obviously this is the Neptunes who wore BAPE first. Like that has been a question in hip hop. If you ask Wayne, it's him. You ask Soldier Boy, he's like, yeah, Wayne did it, but I really did it. Other people would say, nah, it was Pharrell. In reality, and this is where I'm going to put my stake in, Biggie was the first rapper to rock BAPE. And there's a whole story, the backstory of what happened in the book with a great photo of that moment. And, I talk about like Biggie and Beastie Boys, like people who you may not attribute to streetwear being these like original kind of streetwear connoisseurs. So I think whether you have like no knowledge on the subject or you're like, yeah, I know a lot about it, I promise you, you will learn something because I learned so much.
Yeah. I had some very little knowledge, but just some awareness of the low lives. But I love that part of the book just because my brother is around that age and the he grew up in the 80s when and he passed that down to me wearing polo. So like to hear how like he probably got influenced by it was really dope to hear, how that movement kind of got started. But yeah, the we'll get into the BAPE thing in a second because I think I'm glad you explained that because like that was one of the things that I had never ever heard of. Like I obviously there's a whole chapter about, you talked about how you ended with Pharrell getting to Louis Vuitton, but the whole chapter about Billionaire Boys Club. Um, I had no idea about Biggie wearing BAPE. I knew about the Chanel collabs a little bit, but I had never seen that CC the World song or video. So that was dope. So I mean, obviously I have a special, it's not bias, but like Pharrell's important because we're from Virginia. Like that's where I get my inspiration from. But do you think that he's the rapper slash artist in hip hop that's had made the biggest impact on fashion in our time?
I think he's one of course, Pharrell. There's Kanye. I mean, for better or worse, Kanye is incredibly influential in that space. I think what Pharrell has been able to do is he garnered that credibility as just always being very much a maverick and an individual. So even within hip hop, the first time that rappers were meeting the Neptunes, and I'm sure you've watched the Lego biopic, but they were very uncertain. And I remember when I interviewed Noriega, he told me like the first time he met Pharrell, he's wearing these like skinny jeans, like a skin tight shirt, a choker. So he's like, he looked like a nerd. Like we were wearing like triple XL jeans, white tee, Air Force Ones, and he just does not look like anybody. But because the music was so innovative and futuristic, people did eventually kind of give him his due. But I think he was able to take that spirit, evolve into an entrepreneur, but then also work with these high fashion brands. So I remember when they were looking at who would take over Virgil's position after he sadly passed away, I wasn't surprised they went with Pharrell because I think he's able to work in so many different rooms and he's pretty much universally well liked, well respected. So he does have a special place, I think, within this narrative. But yeah, of course, like Kanye, I would say like ASAP Rocky. I mean, the book is called Fashion Killa, and I think he really represented hip hop becoming more pan regional, where he's from Harlem, but raps like he's from Houston and dresses like he's from Europe. Like, how does any of this fit? But that was an indicator of where hip hop was going. And then if you go back, somebody like a Tupac, a lot of people don't realize right before he passed, Tupac walked in a Versace show in Milan. And he was apparently someone very liked by Gianni Versace. And he was someone who had worked with Carl Kanai and he had worked with other people, April Walker. So he too was, I think, able to live in that sort of high fashion as well as hip hop fashion realm. So there's so many people, but yes, of course, Pharrell is incredibly significant to this story.
Yeah, I think definitely Pharrell and Kanye for someone in my age group, just because they made it seem like it was attainable. I always think about you talked about this in the book too, that moment where Pharrell and Virgil and Don C and Farnsworth were at Fashion Week, but weren't really going to shows because they didn't really get invited. They were just kind of like posting up and taking pictures and but making a statement, right? And that moment is cemented in history because they were just so outrageous and so like we're making a statement. I think that's like when Don C said, or he said Kanye said this is going to be like the civil rights movement or something like that, which I think is like
Kanye
as
says a lot
crazy
of
as you,
things,
as crazy as you think it seems, right? It's like it's not
kind of true. Yeah,
wrong.
kind of
It's
true.
yeah, but
And I think that again, it's like I'm sure everyone has seen that famous photo. It's like Kanye, Don C, Farnsworth, Taz Arnold. I know I'm going to forget somebody. Julian from yeah. So there's that picture, but it's like, what is the story behind it? And I was able to interview someone like a Farnsworth and like, what was it like being there? Why did you guys all put those outfits on and almost like creating your own fashion moment outside of the show? And I think even again, somebody like a Kanye, you love him or you hate him, but he is somebody who's a visionary. He doesn't take no for an answer. And I think when somebody tells him, okay, you don't belong here, that's exactly where he wants to go. And for people who I interviewed who've known him since the beginning, fashion was always a part of the vision. Like he was the guy doing his, cover shoot for like The Source, but like styling himself. Like he knew what he wanted to do. But it is funny if you think back when he was wearing like the pink polos and the collar popped up, he did get backlash too. It's easy to forget there was a time when people questioned his sexuality, they questioned his intentions, like, are you even hip hop? Remember, he's signed to Rockefeller. None of those guys look like the way he was dressing. So even at that time, he was very open to being a rebel. And I think you'll see that theme, whether it's Ye, Pharrell, Tyler, whomever. I think people who take risks, it's like a high risk, high reward. And I do think, in the same way that we really gravitated towards it in music, it's the same way in fashion.
Yeah, I definitely that part of the Kanye section, like talking about, how the pink polo had people questioning, and you talk about metrosexual, like there
Yeah.
was a moment my freshman year, because my origin is like I'm growing up in Virginia. I'm a big Pharrell Neptunes fan, but like those 2003, 2004 years was very Kanye influenced, and I had polos in almost every color. So like there was a point where in my freshman year at Hampton where there was a girl who I was in class with a bunch in the first couple weeks that like said that she thought that I was gay because I used to wear pink polos, green, whatever. Like, and I was like, what? Like, and it blew my mind. But I was like, I guess that makes I could see where you get that from, but no. But that part
It's
of
true. And it's funny because I have a whole section about sexuality and sort of homophobia, but also masculinity. So, of course, talking about people like Young Thug can wear a dress, but that's okay. Cam can wear pink. That's okay. Andre 3000 can wear a colorful wig. That's okay. But I think a lot of that was they were viewed either as, street guys, or in the case of Andre, he's like dating the hottest women in the world. So no one is questioning his sexuality, but it is quite intriguing how fashion signifies things to people. And sometimes it's intentional, but like you said, in your case, you were trying to get probably the attention of girls, and they're like, no, I thought you like guys. And that was just because you enjoy wearing pastels on a day that wasn't Easter.
trying to be like Kanye. Mr.
Trying to
Only.
be like Kanye. But it's crazy. Like now he's so influential and he's influenced like so many subsequent generations. But I remember when Kanye first came out, like a lot of like guys who I knew they would probably deem themselves like hip hop heads, they really weren't into it. Like Kanye spoke to a lot of like the nerds, the suburban kids. We understood College Dropout. Like that album made sense to us. I could see, and I mean, I'm sure if you watch that Kanye documentary on Netflix, people in Rockefeller were really confused. Like Dame signed him ultimately, I think mostly just to keep him on as a producer, but they didn't understand that vision. Like Kanye had to do a lot of groundwork himself to convince people that he was a viable artist.
So transitioning, well, not transitioning because we're talking about music right now, but this season for us on the show is R&B season. So I know you do a lot of work in the hip hop space. You got a background in writing a lot about hip hop, but obviously there's a ton of overlap in hip hop and R&B are brother and sister. So what is
Now
R?
they're one and the same. I truly believe every rapper wants to be a singer and every
Yeah.
singer wants to be a
So
rapper,
talk about
which
what you think
explains the
R&B means.
state of R&B now.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about what R&B means to you, but also like just elaborate a little bit on the current state of R&B.
Yikes. All right. Well, I'm a kid of the 90s, so I love 90s R&B. That's like my favorite era. It's just so good. Like whether it's, the groups like the Jodeci's, Boys to Men, 112, to like the artists, Donnell Jones and Carl Thomas and, so many artists. certain artists who have now been canceled. We don't need to say their names, but there were just so many incredible artists. Mary J. Blige, Aaliyah, like there's it's so much great R&B. And, you know, one of my favorite shows is actually R&B Money, which is like Tank and Jay Valentine. And I love when they interview like old school R&B artists like, you know, John B or Case, like those things I love. But, you know, to me in the 90s, R&B singers, and I'm, you know, painting with a bit of a broad brush, but they were about seducing, you know, it was about the conversation. You know, it's Babyface, it's Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. It was all about, you know, can we talk? I'm down on bended knee. There was a certain, I guess, tenderness that I think along the way we kind of lost. And, you know, it was always kind of a running joke in hip hop that rappers wanted to be singers. If you listen to even like Life After Death, there's like a whole interlude of Biggie singing. I think it's like Play a Hater or something.
Yep.
Total filler. I hate that record. I'm a huge Biggie fan, but I understood like because in rappers' mind, well, the R&B guys get the girls, so they get all the girls. They're considered more sort of traditionally attractive. And let's be honest, the 90s R&B men were very fine. We don't have that fineness anymore, but you know, I don't know what's in the water. But I do think there was always that feeling. And then as time went on and you would see these hip hop and R&B collaborations, we now came to a place where I truly believe most R&B singers, they want to be seen as tough. You know, they're talking about hoes and flying women out and, you know, disrespecting women. Not to say that those themes weren't in previous generations, like I get it, but I still feel there was a foundation of seduction that I think is just gone now. I don't know what I would pinpoint it to. I oftentimes point to auto tune, and I feel like Hove was trying to warn us. Sorry, T Pain, but I really feel like outside of him, everyone should not be jumping on auto tune. But you know, I'm sure you can do like a whole thesis on where R&B went. Not to say there aren't new artists who aren't doing stuff, but personally to me it just doesn't move me. It doesn't move me emotionally. It's not in sort of like, you know, my sexy playlist. Like I'm going to go to the classics. It's going to be Jodeci and Maxwell and Donnell. Like that's who it's going to be, not the newer artists. But, you know, my advice would be, especially to singers, there's got to be that conversation. Go back to the songwriting. And I don't know how you can replicate that. Like who has a pen like Kenny, who has a pen like Jam and Lewis, right? Like, but going back to that, I think that's such a foundation that's missing. But what do you think? Like, what are you thinking about current R&B?
I mean, we've talked about it on the show so far and a couple times, like with my co-host Vogue and some other guests we've had. Is just I think something that we kind of pinpointed that's been, you know, influential in not the demise, but the decline of R&B really is kind of like the combination of not having the superstars in R&B transition during
Yeah,
the
like we're like the hot icons. It's funny. So not too long ago, I saw Usher. He played at Barclays, and his career has been almost like longer than I've been alive, but he still had it, and he was able to have, you know, the love songs, the sexy records, the up tempo, but he can sing, he can dance, he's handsome. I think also going back to that artist development where we just don't see that anymore, where a singer is kind of, you know, signed off of SoundCloud or signed off of TikTok. But back in the day, you might spend, you know, half your life in church, and think how competitive that is, right? To be the soloist in church. You did, you know, your the talent shows locally. I mean, going back to Virginia, a great story is, you know, that famous talent show that Teddy Riley was judging. And it's like Pharrell, the Neptunes, but all these other people. And at the time in Virginia, you have D'Angelo, like you have all of these things happening, Missy and Tim. So iron sharpens iron. And I think now just that lack of development, competition, right? Like there's no Star Search. Like you would go on that show, they would dog you. Like some of your favorites have gone on there holding back tears because they would be like, nope, 3 stars, go home. Like it was brutal back then. But I think that helped create a generation of artists who were truly these multi hyphenates, like a Beyonce. She can sing, she can dance, she has charisma, sex appeal. We just don't see that anymore. And I do agree with you that that star power, some of it is God given, but a lot of it is also developed over time.
And combine all that with just the way that technology has changed how we consume
Auto tune, auto tune. Yeah. Uh huh.
soon, and people aren't buying CDs, and like just the streaming era, just everything is like it's made it so much easier, especially when you talk about that combined with what you said about the rappers singing. Like, you know, most
Oh yeah,
people,
every rapper wants to be like an R&B singer. Like, and I again, I don't know where we would pinpoint that. Maybe it's Drake. Not that he was the first rapper to also sing, because we had Lauryn Hill, you had Bone Thugs, you had Missy, you had people. But in my mind, Drake did change the game for better or for worse, because he showed his certain brand of, I guess he would call his certified lover boy, toxic male bro music. But this is what sells. And everyone who came subsequently wanted to emulate that. And you see a lot of like Drake clones, 808 and Heartbreak clones. Like you see a lot of that running around as well. And I think it becomes harder because who's really speaking to the women, for lack of a better phrase, right? It's to anyone, but like who are the crooners, who are the icons, like whose records are we going to listen to the way we listen to Marvin Gaye or the Isleys, like Al Green? Like, I don't know if we've seen any of those kind of iconic artists in a very long time.
so in the R&B space, like what are your top three Neptunes R&B songs?
Oh my God. Neptune's R&B songs. I may have to. Okay, is Fronting, does that count as one? Is that an R&B-ish song?
100%.
That, okay, so I'm putting that for sure. Great record. And, you know, the video, the whole verse, it all worked for me. And, you know, it's even just thematically, it really kind of fit that kind of 2000s. A lot of us like were in high school or college. So that kind of fit the whole, you know, you have a crush on somebody, you go to a house party and see them. So very much fit within what was going on in a lot of our lives. This is not R&B, this is pop, but I have to say Slave for You. That record is great. That is a great fucking record. Now it would be probably problematic, and that's another story, but at the time, the biggest pop star in the world, having her do something completely different, it was sultry, it was provocative, but still fit within what she does, I think was incredible. Another R&B record. All right, one R&B record I was listening to recently. I love everything the Neptunes did with Khalees.
Okay.
Out There, I was just listening to Caught Out There.
Yeah.
That's a great record.
Yeah.
And just her vocals, the production, but also her style, like just, you know, the kind of like she's a hippie, but also very sort of kind of rocker chick. She's got some punk in her, but she's from Harlem. Like Khalees is really dope. And I think her music holds up quite well, especially that first album. And I was actually listening to that record not too long ago.
Yeah. A couple things like interesting, not interesting, but like cool to hear you bring up Britney Spears. Me and my partner did a battle this summer. Like we just like had different categories and we pick a Neptune's R&B song that fit the category. And like
I mean, I wouldn't call her R&B per se, but that's just such a great record that I'm shoehorning it in for this
yeah, she
conversation.
played that song in the crowd. The crowd reaction to it was very much like, is this R&B? But I still love it, so I'm not going to
It's a
question.
great record. It's a great record. Yeah. And it's still like if you hear it, it's funny. I watched the Neptunes, the Pharrell biopic, and I went home just revisit the Neptunes. Those records still sound futuristic. Like that's insane to me. There's a few artists, and funny enough, so a lot of them are from Virginia, but Missy and Tim, Pharrell, like you go listen to those records. This could come out today and be a hit record. And that's incredible.
Yeah, we're probably going to do an episode later this year. I think December is like 20 years of Khalees's Tasty and 25 years from
Wow.
Let's Go, which is like make us all feel old. But still, to your
Oh my
point,
God. Hello, Usher. You don't have to call. Sorry, I'm going through my mental Rolodex. That record is still the best getting dressed record in life. Like, I don't care if you're wearing a pink polo, because you did say that's your taste. anytime you want to go out and just hype yourself up, that record will just put you in the best mood.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites of all time.
So good. So good.
So not necessarily R&B specifically, but who do you think is either the best or your favorite of like the Neptunes frequent collaborators, people who they have a bunch of records with?
Oh, clips. Not even a question. Not even a question. I mean, I know it's been said, but let it be said again. Like cafeteria tables are just never the same after grinding. That, the first album was great. The second album, arguably, maybe even better. But, the fact that Pharrell introduced us to the clips, and only by watching the biopic did I get the backstory. Like, I didn't realize that there was a gap in time between Pharrell making it as the Neptunes and later coming back and calling Pusha, like, if you don't come to my house in 15 minutes, I'm giving this beat away. I think he said to Jay-Z, right? Like, I'm giving it away. You better come here and do what you got to do. I mean, to this day, I feel like Pusha works the best with Pharrell and Kanye. Like, those are his sort of like musical soulmates. And again, I love that it's Virginia. I love that they grew up together. There is something I think about that camaraderie and a true relationship that you feel in the music. And some people would disagree, especially now when you've got producers just like sending out beats. They're not even in the same room with when the record gets cut. They don't care. It's like, here's a beat pack, take what you want. But I do think there is something special when there is more of an investment. And Pharrell introduced us to the clips, right? It's now presenting, right? Star Trek presents, he's in the videos with them. So I love like Neptunes plus the clips, I think is always magic.
Yeah, I did really appreciate the part where Pusha was talking about the song with Carrie Hilson that he doesn't like, which just shows to your point, like there was a trust level that he for him to sign off on it, but then also for them to step back and say, hey, that one didn't work. We missed on that one.
Yeah, and I totally forgot that. I actually hit him after, like, what was that record? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't even remember that record, but I do know there was a time when the Clips were not happy in their Jive situation. But again, I think the Clips is just like a dope group. I love that they're brothers, like, and the fact that they're back together again and Pharrell's supposed to be working on their new album. I think there is just something really unique and interesting about it. And again, like as day one fans, I don't care how much Pusha raps about Coke. I will buy it.
Doesn't matter.
I will buy it. I don't care. He can rap about it 57, 50, 11 ways. I will support it because you listen to his music, it makes you want to become like Avon Barksdale. I'm also just doing a Wire rewatch, which is neither here nor there, but it makes you think that you're like, El Chapo. Stay off drugs, kids, stay in school. But my point is the music from a fictional perspective, it just takes you there and it's an incredible soundtrack.
Yeah, it's art. I mean,
Sure.
I can't even,
Statute of Limitations is over. It's totally fiction.
I can't explain how excited I am for this new album. Like I just
Yeah.
like, just hearing that one song at the one of the Louis Vuitton shows earlier this year was like, can't wait, can't wait.
And that's the thing for younger artists is like create music and create connections with fans that 20, 30 years later, they get excited for you to drop. And I don't think that's just coming in and wanting to secure the bag or putting your personal life all on social media. Like, I don't think that's what you're going to get down the line. Like, to be an iconic artist, to be a legend, I really think as an artist, it has to first be based in your music.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition to let's talk about Tyler. Tyler dropped on Monday. What are your thoughts?
So I will say I haven't heard it yet. So somebody had hit me on social media. So I just launched my own YouTube not too long ago and they're like, "Yo, can you like review it on your channel?" So what I've started doing, I'll listen to it once and just do like a quick hot take, one listen review. So I've been saving it. I have not listened to it yet. I've heard mixed things about it. I'm hearing it's kind of disjointed. But the thing about Tyler, he's so experimental. And I think that's where the line between trying something new versus trying something new and it failing miserably is very fine. But I am going in with an open mind and I have to hold my judgment because I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, so I won't spoil anything for you. I'll say My lens for this album is a lot of it is like the original OG Odd Future Tyler. I didn't get it. I just thought
Okay.
weird and like it didn't make sense. Now there was that I think that first like okay maybe we have something here is when they did that record with Pusha and Tyler that the Neptunes did on one of the Pusha mixtapes. But I think as time progressed, I think I really sat with Flower Boy and I've been kind of
Mhm.
locked in since then. Like I think that was a transition where I was like, okay, cool. This he's actually trying to be an artist. He's not just rapping crazy stuff just to make, for lack of a better term, memeable songs, right? Like he's actually like cares about this. And so like I've really
I think
appreciated
I got on him with Goblin. Like I remember Odd Future. I remember going to their shows and just being like, this isn't for me. It's like a bunch of kids jumping around off the walls. I was more interested in kind of like the internet, like Sid, obviously Frank, but I was sort of lukewarm on just Tyler himself. And, he had said a lot of problematic things, homophobic things, which later, we can reanalyze. But I think Goblin is when I was like, oh, okay, there's some rapping here. I'm not gonna completely dismiss him, but I think a lot of people would agree with you. I think Flower Boy was probably the tipping point for him into like the stardom that we see now.
and I'll just say from a marketing standpoint, I really appreciate the energy that's been put into how he's been very like, these are the things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's get it out, get people excited, drop it. Everyone listen. You love it, you don't
Yeah.
love it. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would, as a journalist, of course, you want to see him do like a proper interview. But
Yep.
I wasn't mad at his interview with Mav Carter not too
Yeah.
long ago. I thought that was somewhat insightful. And, one thing I thought was funny, he posted about how fans should listen to this album. It was like, turn off your social media, listen to it, make your own opinion. And it's funny that we have to almost reteach people how to consume music, but it's imperative because I think your fans now, especially in hip hop, listen to something. If the first like 30 seconds don't grab them, onto the next, onto the next. And I do think that's an issue of why you're not really seeing new hip hop superstars. You're not seeing a lot of records charting the way that you would think, or they chart week one and they fall off the chart. Like that week two fall off is brutal. I think just when you treat music like it's disposable, you get it for free, you don't really value it. So it is kind of funny to me that Tyler's almost like teaching his fans, like, this is how you listen to an album. You press play, you don't skip around, and you don't go on social media to see what people are saying. You don't wait 1 second to call something a classic or call something trash. Wait and garner your own opinion.
Yeah. And I think that that's definitely valuable. Someone that's at his level, is still taking the time to one understand how important it is, but also like to not have the ego to feel like I shouldn't have to tell them that. Like the fact that he's like, I want people to
Yeah.
do this, so I'm going to make sure they do it. And if it means
Yeah.
me telling them to do it, cool. And I think that it's worked, right? Like I
Yeah.
listen to it my way from I live in Hampton, it's like an hour and a half away from Richmond. I went there for my Natalie's sister.
Homecoming, right?
No, I was in Richmond this week because Natalie's sister had a basketball game.
Oh,
um,
okay.
but I listened to it the whole way, and I got to sit with it and was just like, it's definitely he's right. You need to at least for the first couple times like just go all the way through and really get the whole and appreciate the project. But then there are a couple songs that I really love that I listen to singularly now.
Awesome. I'll take a listen. I'll report back.
All right. So last thing before I let you go, because I'm like obviously this is our first time meeting and talking to each other. I just read the book and I love the book, but I am extremely excited about the next book. So set that up for everyone. Talk about your next project just to give people a little bit of a preview or what they should be expecting.
So the next book is Rockefeller. So it is Rockefeller Records, an American rap dynasty. It is 10 years from 94 to '04. The rise, and fall of what I say is the greatest hip hop label of all time. And in the same way I mentioned with Fashion Killa, for my next book, I wanted to tell an important story. I mean, I'm a huge like Rockefeller fan, but I wanted to tell the story beyond just like the gossip and the clickbait and these podcast interviews. Like, what can we learn from the business of this label? What can we learn from the marketing? The people they put into place in different roles. How did things change when they went into Def Jam? Like all of these, the workings, like what can we learn from this label? And that's what I'm working on now. So I'm kind of knee deep in like the historical aspect now. I was really honored to be able to interview someone like Clark Kent, who just recently passed, unfortunately, but a lot of like the day ones, which is great. And for me, my hope is people will read this book. Of course, you're getting the history and the moments and all this stuff, but the cultural importance and also the business importance of this label. So that's TBD. I should be writing now, but I'm clearly doing interviews. But my goal is for it to drop like in probably like a year-ish or two. Like books take a long time to write. It's more of a marathon. So stay tuned. But yes, Rockefeller Records coming soon from Simon and Schuster.
I'm excited. I like I said earlier, I grew up on Bad Boy in middle school, Rockefeller in high school.
There you
So
go.
Jay-Z's my favorite rapper. So, I'm really excited about this. I'll put you on the spot real quick. What's your favorite Rockefeller album?
I mean, look, if we're going to talk Jay-Z albums, right? It's Reasonable Doubt number one, number two, Black Album. No,
Hmm?
yeah, yeah. Because that's the bookend. Three, Selfish, volume two. I know a lot of people don't have it on their list. I don't fucking care. That was a tipping point album. Four, American Gangster. Controversial, but it must be said. I know it was a themed album, but still some of his greatest work is on there. And I'll end with Blueprint. I've been revisiting volume one lately, and that might be a contender.
Volume
Like
one?
the misses were really bad misses, but what worked really worked. So yeah, that fifth spot kind of changes, but for now, let's say Blueprint.
Yeah, shout out to my brother Justin Tinsley. He always talks about how much he loves Volume One.
Volume one. Yeah, there's like a support group for volume one people. I'm in the volume two support group, and like no one wants to be in that group. Actually, a huge argument with Pusha about this. Like, is volume two a classic? I say yes. He said no, but it was imperative for that album to happen for Jay to become a superstar. So I respect that.
And I think to that point, that's why it's a classic.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I said, but I could see where some people would say there was some filler. And thematically, it is kind of all over the place, but that's neither here nor there.
it definitely is not as cohesive an album as, you know, Blueprint or
No,
even 444, right? But I think that like
right.
that's because at the time, that's what the market was really looking for. They weren't really necessarily looking for you to take them on a journey. Like they just wanted
And also, volume one didn't do great. So imagine you're coming after volume one. Like, how do you recover? You know,
gotta get people the hits. Like
the hits,
that's
man.
that was the name of the game in the 90s. I'd say outside of Jay-Z, my favorite Rockefeller album is Philadelphia Freeway.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like
That's
that
fair.
album coming out in 2003, I was in like, I guess 11th grade. But that's an album that really doesn't have any skips if you like,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're into that music and you were into what they were doing. Like obviously What We Do is one of the best rap songs of all time, like
All
consider.
time.
But yeah, what a run. I can't wait. It's gonna
Want to
be,
run.
I'm sure you're gonna have some great insight. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you. Thank you. But for now, Fashion Killa, How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion is in stores, hardcover, and we just dropped paperback. So both of those are available. You know, I
Gotcha.
had to put in the final plug, you know. I'm like a rapper selling a mixtape.
Anything else you want to plug or tell people where to check you out at before we
No,
go?
you can check me out on social media at Sowmya K. And I just launched a YouTube channel. So I'm trying to populate that with some, commentary, analysis, and try to give a little bit of a different perspective from what's going on now in like the hip hop podcast sphere and just a lot of that bro talk, actually have a little bit of insight and analysis. So you can follow me on YouTube as well.
Yeah, definitely a lot of talk about hip hop journalism over the past couple weeks, and
That's a whole other conversation, friend. Whole
we'll
other conversation. Yeah. Leave with a positive. Let's leave on good vibes.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. Like everyone,
Thank you.
definitely check out Fashion Killa if you're interested or you care about the hip hop space and how it intersects with fashion and culture is a must read. Sowmya, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Appreciate y'all checking out Neptune Sunday. Catch you later. Peace and love.